Hi, everyone. I'll give you a moment to connect to sound. Hi, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1041st New Social Environment. I'm Chloe Stagaman, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the extreme pleasure and privilege to be your MC today for a conversation featuring Glenn Adamson, Leilehua Lanzilotti, Kate Wiener, and Christina Yang. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Guests, plural. Glenn Adamson is a curator, writer, and historian based in New York and London. He's previously been director of the Museum of Arts and Design and head of research at the V&A. Dr. Adamson's publications include Fewer, Better Things, The Hidden Wisdom of Objects, Objects USA, and Craft, An American History. Dr. Adamson is editor of Material Intelligence, a quarterly online journal published by the Chipstone Foundation, and curator-at-large for LongHouse Reserve. His next book, A Century of Tomorrows, will be out in December of this year from Bloomsbury. Leilehua Lanzilotti is a Kanaka Maoli composer, multimedia artist, and curator. A leading composer-performer, Lanzilotti's work is characterized by expansive explorations of timbre. Lanzilotti's practice explores radical Indigenous contemporaneity by integrating community engagement and ways of knowing into the heart of projects. Lanzilotti was a finalist for the 2022 Pulitzer Prize in Music. Kate Wiener is a curator at the Isamu Noguchi Foundation and Garden Museum in Long Island City, New York, where she is involved with exhibitions, public programs, and publications. She's contributed to numerous publications, including Toshiko Takaezu, Worlds Within, Looking Up, The Sky Viewing Sculptures of Isamu Noguchi, and Trigger, Gender as a Tool and Weapon. And our host today, Christina Yang, is an independent curator, writer, scholar, and educator based in New York. She specializes in experimental genres, politics of the image, social practice, and feminist care. She's a PhD candidate in performance studies at NYU. Her dissertation, Performance in the Gaze, Spectatorship in the Kitchen Archive from 1974 to 84, is forthcoming. She has worked at many museums in New York, including the Whitney Museum, as well as in Massachusetts, and most recently in Berkeley, California. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Christina. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here today.
Thank you so much, Chloe and Fong, Carolyn, Eleanor, Lewis, the entire Brooklyn Rail team for having us here this afternoon, my time, New York. I'm thrilled to be co-hosting today's conversation about the transcendent work of artist Toshiko Takaezu, and with the equally dream curatorial team of Glenn, Kate, and Leilehua. And I just thought I would give the curators a chance to actually say hello from where they are from, because we have truly an international representation and also wide temporal range from, I think, early morning to midday to evening. So maybe Kate, Glenn, and Leilehua, would you like to say hello and where you're coming from today?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much all for being here and for this opportunity. We're so excited. Yeah, I'm Kate, and I'm calling in from Rhode Island, actually.
And hi, everyone. Great honor to be part of this amazing series. My name's Glenn, and I'm over in London now. I just came over here after the opening for the Takaezu show. So good to be with you today.
And I'm Leilehua Lanzilotti, and I'm coming to you from Merwin Conservancy on Maui, which is on the lands of the Kanaka Maoli. And it's very early, so I may be seen drinking coffee during this talk, but I'm really grateful to be here.
Thank you so much. I'm going to be drinking coffee too, so it's like a day-long consumption. So I'm just going to offer a few introductory comments, and then we're going to dive right in and look at this incredible exhibition project, which is more than just a straight exhibition. But I was, telling a friend that, while we're going to try to cover as much of the exhibition and body of work of Takaezu as we can in an hour, that engaging with Toshiko is really like encountering an artist like Mondrian or Picasso. I feel like the depth and the, multidisciplinarity and the impact that she has on the history of modern contemporary art is so incredible. And I'm really thrilled that the exhibition, is offering us a way to position her amidst this history, and really seeing how she both expands and shifts this entire canon. So I'm really excited about us doing that, and for you to see the work of how these curators have done that work. And I also want to hopefully offer an opportunity to have them unpack their curatorial process and give us some tools whereby to see what we may not see at first glance, see and hear and sense, because I think that's what the work of this artist does for us. Maybe by way of context, we can just go to the first slide, Chloe. I'll offer that this exhibition just opened in New York, as Glenn mentioned, at the Noguchi Museum in Long Island City. It'll be on view through the summer. It includes nearly or more than 200 works of hers, and across the full representation of her multimedia practice, from ceramic sculptures to textiles to paintings. And there is an entire exhibition experience in sound, which her works also are very much part of. And I have to congratulate the Noguchi team on providing sound tours, actually, with the, and actually I believe a touch tour as well. So I really hope that all of you get a chance to engage in seeing the exhibition or reading the catalog, or following along in this kind of program. And at some point I think we'll ask the curators to speak about the tour of the exhibition, because it's such a special representation of her chronology as well. So let's just jump right into it. So I think, with thinking about Toshiko's work, we're starting in Hawaii, back where Leilehua happens to be dialing in from today. And, so loosely marking the 100th birthday of Toshiko's, her own birth in 1922, my first question to the team is, I would love to hear about how you came to the work, and then how you came together, the three of you, and what maybe was especially important about doing this show now, like in these last 2 years since 1922. Since we have, Chloe, let's hold on the Noguchi slide real quick. Leilehua, since we have your sound piece up, would you like to tell us how you came to the work, and maybe a story about how the three of you came together?
Sure. So I think, first of all, in terms of the three of us coming together, the three of us all wouldn't be a part of the show without Dakin Hart, who was the former senior curator at the Noguchi Museum, who kind of brought the three of us on in different ways. But a much longer story about how I personally encountered Takaezu is I grew up around her work. My mom was the curator of education at the Contemporary Museum in Honolulu, and Takaezu was there all the time, and worked with that staff a lot. And so I kind of passively knew her work as a little kid growing up in that museum, and then was brought back onto the project about 5 years ago, after the last work that I had done with the Noguchi Museum. I was just coming into being a curator of music at MPAC, the Experimental Media and Performing Arts Center. And so kind of having this background doing this work with the Noguchi Museum, playing a bunch of Noguchi sculpture and being in a curatorial role, Dakin started that conversation with me about 5 years ago about what that would look like to kind of combine these two things, wearing these different hats to kind of illuminate Takaezu's work. And of course, this image is from my installation, which I might talk about later, but is of one of the Lehua groves on the Big Island, which is kind of pre-devastation forest. But you can see in this image, because we're going to see that image later, the white bark of the Lehua trees that you'll see more starkly in kind of evoked in one of Takaezu's works later. So immediately from this, we kind of are into Takaezu's world of color in Hawaii. Glenn, do you want to speak a little bit more about your relationship with Takaezu's work and kind of how you came to this?
Sure. It goes back a long ways for me as well, though probably not quite as long as it does for you, Leilehua. So I've been involved in writing the history of craft as it intersects with the arts for a long time. And it, I suppose, always seemed to me, since I encountered her work probably in my 20s, that Takaezu was on that short list of figures who, as Christine, I think, rightly said in her introduction, not only had a preeminent role in her own craft-based discipline, which is, it's a primarily ceramics, although as we'll show, she also worked in weaving, briefly in painting and other media like bronze casting, printmaking. But not only did she have that preeminent position in ceramics, but she also was clearly an artist to be reckoned with in a much broader framework. And so I would put her alongside, you know, other figures like Sheila Hicks, Ruth Asawa, Lenore Tawney, who we'll probably talk a little bit about because Takaezu was so close with her. Not incidentally, all those are women. And it's very much worth pointing out that in the post-war period, ambitious artists who were female often did find themselves working in craft-based media because they were more available, more open. They were not devoid of obstacles, but certainly fewer obstacles than there would have been in, let's say, architecture, painting, sculpture. So it had long been an ambition of mine to study her more closely. And of course, it's been an incredible opportunity to work with Kate and the team at the Noguchi Museum to realize this project and also to realize the book, which I think I'm right in saying is actually the largest and most comprehensive, I should say, publication ever on a 20th century ceramic artist. Lots of essays that we commissioned from many different perspectives, not only on Takaezu, but also on her context of Asian American arts, of Hawaii specifically, the relationship between sound and form, her relationship to painting. So the opportunity to contribute the biographical element of that book for Yale University Press was a great one for me. And Kate, would you want to sort of round out the story?
And Chloe, I think we can go to the first slide of Toshiko at the Noguchi Museum, which would be appropriate for Kate to help introduce us.
Yeah, so we were so happy to find this photo of Toshiko in the garden with one of Noguchi's works. But Takaezu and Noguchi were close friends. We don't actually know when they met. It's a question that came up many times, but we do know that, so if anyone knows on here by chance, please let us know. But we do know they were kind of in shared artistic circles and supporters of each other's work. Noguchi had a collection of Takaezu's work and his own personal collection, a few of works, which we actually have on view. And so it felt really exciting to think about this show at the Noguchi Museum because of this personal connection, but also because of some kind of broader thematic connections that went beyond just them knowing each other and being friends. I think the two of them model these incredible hybrid artistic practices and are thinking about intersectionality and interdisciplinarity in really interesting ways. And another really kind of important point of connection that we cared a lot about in this show is thinking about Takaezu's relationship to nature and to environment building. And so to mount this show in the Noguchi Museum, which is itself this kind of extraordinary landscape that Noguchi sculpted and created, just felt like a really exciting opportunity. And I should say that Dakin, who we mentioned, included Takaezu's work in a 2016 exhibition at the museum called Museum of Stones. Which was actually my introduction to her work. And then it just felt like a really beautiful, exciting idea to kind of continue this thinking about her place in the Noguchi Museum.
Thank you so much. That's a beautiful introduction for our audience. Chloe, we go to the next slide, actually. Why don't we enter the Noguchi Museum itself? You know, here we have both Noguchi and Takaezu's work, which is actually on the first floor where the Noguchi Museum has an entire, you know, chronology of Noguchi's work, but it introduces you as you go up to the second floor where the Takaezu exhibition is on view. I just thought I would make a quick pause here. I mean, the three of you have gone through really beautifully the recurring theme around nature and the landscape, specifically, Hawaii is a kind of tropical island and its particular geopolitics. But just wondering if any of the three of you want to make a pause again, thinking about the particular opening of this exhibition here, but I guess I'm particularly interested in both this intersectional kind of question around Takaezu's work and the conversation with Noguchi, also a really interesting, much more recognized international figure, but someone who is moving between Japan, the US, Europe, and the history of 20th and 21st century modernism and contemporary art. But any thoughts on how you wanted to strike a kind of complicated but also stunning conversation between the two of them?
I think Kate could talk more about Noguchi, but one of the things that I find really exciting, a previous exhibition that Noguchi did was about Hasegawa and Noguchi in post-war Japan, but Takaezu also went to Japan after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I think that similar to Noguchi, there was this interest to go back to finding the experimental and contemporary ideas coming from the origin culture that they associated with. Of course, Takaezu being Okinawan as an indigenous Japanese person, was reckoning with that in a lot of different ways. Okinawa got a lot of the brunt at the beginning of World War II, and many Okinawans died as a function of that right at the beginning of World War II. And so the two of them coming, I think, I wish that we could hear all of their conversations, but I find that as a really kind of point of a thread between Takaezu and Noguchi that's really interesting in terms of going back to what does it mean to be contemporary as an artist that's not necessarily to be Western. And this is something that Japan was dealing with at the time, but I think also especially artists like Noguchi and Takaezu going there were trying to reckon with at the time. And so we see even in this piece that's on the screen, some of this idea of kind of looking at brushstroke and evoking brushstroke and evoking some of these calligraphy techniques and taking contemporary ideas from that directly, as opposed to only looking at modernity as an association with the West. And Kate, maybe you can speak more to that with Noguchi or that idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Noguchi piece that you see in the back is actually one of his ceramic sculptures that he made in Japan. He went to Japan many times, but in the 50s he was there and he studied with some of the same ceramic artists that Takaezu would meet and study with just a couple years later. And he was deeply invested in this question of kind of looking back and looking forward. And the piece that you see has a traditional or a glaze on it, and it's called Tall Vase. It actually, you can kind of see it has a little bow on the bottom, which I was always curious about, but I think this is actually based on the clothing of Hanawa figures, which were ancient burial ceramic objects. So really kind of invested in this dialogue of what it means to kind of look to the past and create a ongoing tradition, a living tradition, I think is deeply resonant. And I would say we absolutely could have done a Noguchi Takaezu show if we wanted to, and it's something that was so tempting, and it felt like at least having this one moment where they were connected in a gallery felt really important to us. I actually, I found recently in our archive a note that Noguchi had agreed in the last year of his life to write an essay about Takaezu for one of her catalogs, which he never completed. And we don't have notes from or anything, but I do like thinking of this as a kind of follow-up on that essay that was never written in a way.
Thank you, Kate. Glenn, any thoughts? Will we continue our journey here, or?
Yeah, let's move on. I'll just very briefly say that in addition to the ceramic foundation that both of them are clearly looking to here, you can also in this particular example see the strong debt that Takaezu had to scroll painting. because that, among other things, is vertical, expressionist, near monochrome abstraction, which clearly in her mind would have been related to calligraphy and to historic landscape paintings on silk rendered in ink. So that's another point of comparison to East Asia and a point of learning for her.
Fantastic, fantastic. So let's go up to the second floor, Chloe, and great. So we've left Hawaii. I'm gonna take you out of New York and we're gonna go to Michigan, actually. And I thought I would invite the curators to speak a little bit about her training and her, please feel free to refer back to her training in Hawaii as well. But as she kind of left Hawaii in the 1950s and came with 3 other, women to the Cranbrook Academy of Art, and sort of maybe talk us through, and please feel free to have us forward the slides as well, to her encounter with some incredible educators and sort of how she took her beginnings of craft into a direction around invention and experimentation. So, and if you want to talk about how you've organized the journey for a viewer, I mean, again, we're kind of showing the slides loosely chronological, but what I love about the show is that you can actually experience it through many different kind of like routes and trajectories. And I do want to also have a chance to actually play some of the sound as well, too, because there's an again, like I said, there's an entire exhibition that you can actually completely close your eyes and listen to, or both, listen and watch. So but should we, Glenn, you want to maybe start for the Cranbrook, or yeah, I mean.
Yeah, and you're right that it's almost like an auditory exhibition within the exhibition, which is really wonderful, thanks to Leilehua. But just to very briefly summarize her biographical beginnings, it's important to say that she was raised in an environment where one would have to say it was very unlikely that she would have risen to such prominence as an artist. So she was the middle child, the 6th of 11 children. She said the navel child of a family. So her parents did indeed immigrate from Okinawa as agricultural laborers. And the reason that she ended up working in ceramics was actually because she dropped out of high school to go and work as a domestic servant for a family in Honolulu, and they happened to run a ceramic factory. So she was sort of recruited into working, again, really as additionally an assistant or manual laborer there, and then became committed to the idea of working with ceramics, and then in rapid succession studied at the University of Hawaii in Manoa, and then also went to Cranbrook, as you mentioned, to study with an incredible woman called Maya Grotel, who was herself from Finland and really one of the most significant ceramic artists of the time in America. So Grotel was a major influence for her and really somebody that she looked to lifelong as a mentor. And then from there, she went on to Cleveland Institute of Art. And maybe, Kate, I could turn the story over to you at that point.
And Chloe, can we go back to maybe the gallery view with some of the works from the 50s? Yeah. And then we'll progress to the closed forms after that.
Yeah. So this period of teaching in Cleveland was a really experimental time for her. She was continually kind of playing with the shape of a teapot, and you can see this pedestal in the front here we lovingly call the flock of pots. This, and I should say, a kind of major curatorial conceit and organizing principle for the show was looking back to the ways in which Takaezu installed her own work throughout her lifetime. So beginning with her kind of setting a table of functional ware, which you can see on the left side, and progressing into these increasingly abstract and environmental displays. So the flock of pots you see here is based on a collection she put together where she took these 2 spouted vessels and arranged them in the grass outside and took photographs of them. But you can see this just kind of incredible rush of creative energy. She's it feels almost like the vessels are growing and stretching and sprouting different tops. This was also the period in which she created her first ever closed form, which would go on to be this really signature and important typology that she really kind of plumbed the expressive potential of for the rest of her career. So as you can see, the kind of spouts were growing, and then she decided to experiment with what would happen if they reduced in size. And sometimes there are these kind of vestigial tops. And then her first closed form, she left only an air vent at the top. So the work wouldn't explode in the kiln, but it is this incredible form. She actually, and I can turn it over to Leilehua, but talked about the kind of dark space inside of them being equally as important as these kind of expressive exteriors. And I'll just add about Cleveland, I think it was the slide before, you can see she was trying out all these different forms and shapes, like yeah, here, this is great, kind of vessels that feel almost like humans with chests inflated with breath, or these tamarind seed pod forms on the left. But she did always continue to make functional ware throughout her life, I think is also an important thing to bring up here. She didn't kind of draw a hard and fast distinction between them. They were equally important, but she thought even of her plates as landscapes for the table, is what she called them. But I'll let Leilehua talk about the closed form a little bit more, if that's okay. And she actually did do a recording of this closed form that you can see at the center of the pedestal or platform.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect transition. So Chloe, why don't we advance through the early years, and Leilehua, please speak about the training times. But yeah, this will be
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, as we pass it soon, there's actually a photo in here after the sweet potatoes. That's some of the historical photos. And one of the things I think is really beautiful that the curatorial team did with Kate and Glenn putting these together was, you go one more, you see these are actually shots of historical exhibitions that Takaezu herself curated. And maybe if I can pause a little bit on talking about the closed forms. Kate, we just saw a few of these, or a couple of these, in the previous slides. If either of you wanted to mention that aspect of the curation of the show.
Oh yeah, sure. So if you can see on the top right, what says the annual faculty show, that's actually the installation that inspired the one we were just looking at in the corner with the tamarinds and the tall vessels. So it was important to us to look back at the forms that she was including and innovating at these different times. I should pause to say she created thousands of ceramic works in her lifetime. She was incredibly prolific. And a lot of them are just called closed form or tamarind. And she didn't write the title or the date on the work. So tracking them down, finding them, locating them was a real challenge. And so what we were doing in looking back to these historic installations wasn't necessarily trying to create exact replicas, which is something we couldn't do even if we wanted to, but instead we were invested in learning about how she was sculpting a kind of an environment within these installations. So how the individual works convey that, but also these sometimes multimedia installations construct this idea of this kind of living, active environment was really inspiration for us. So you can see, starting with a set table with just kind of bowls and runners, and getting eventually to these much more immersive installations.
I thought, getting a chance to experience the exhibition as also a history of exhibitions was an incredible public experience, and also, learning experience, and to see so clearly that Takaezu was making worlds with her objects, came through in this referencing of her own exhibition making. And so it's just so beautifully done. And later, I think I'd love to hear from the curators about, again, I want to use a word that's like uplifting what leveling is. So uplifting everything, all the media, from textiles to ceramics to paintings, in their own world, and letting them almost kind of occupy and become something else. And so this is done really beautifully in this exhibition. And, it's amazing how, even though these photographs are historic from, 50 years ago, when you see the arrangements now, they actually still feel so incredibly powerful and prescient and moving. And so this is something that I don't see often in an exhibition of, a retrospective of an artist. Glenn, and any thoughts on this research? And Leilehua, we can go back also to your thoughts, and then on to a couple of the incredible series of large-scale sculptures.
If we move forward one slide, we can see another image that's exactly that while Glenn's talking about that, if that's okay.
I love what G. Schwartz is saying in the chat about their relationships to one another, the familial quality of it. And indeed, that point you made about the leveling, the simultaneous leveling and elevation, I love how you put that, it's like a tide rising, is absolutely my experience of the work. And I think a lot of people would say that there really doesn't, it seems like she's outside of the hierarchy that is so often imposed on these media. And she's using actually several different means of integrating them. So it's not just a matter of, shrugging and pretending that these things all belong together. It's actually a matter of, through incredible artistic intelligence, binding them together. So that's everything from the very simple thing of a horizon line that seems to bind them to finding ways to create comparable mark making in different disciplines. An obvious example would be the way that she uses wax in her bronzes and glaze in her ceramics, but also even the way that she uses the yarns of the weaving as analogous in some ways to the drips or splashes of her glazing. And of course, the way that she uses color, atmosphere, aura, this sort of sublimity on a conceptual level of what she's doing, and just the immersion that she's creating. And given the fact that the ceramics have this enclosing quality, whereas the paintings and the weavings have a more pictorial and externalizing quality, it's particularly remarkable that they seem to have such a unity to them.
Thank you, Glenn. Let's see, why don't we move through? Yeah, perfect. So there are two dedicated galleries that have, again, these like forests of large sculptural works, at least two. There's a third one that's also an amazing, room size installation. But I would love to hear each of the curators, maybe Leilehua, we could start with you, speaking about this innovative sculptural form that is also a sound object. And it really, there's no other artist I think that has made this kind of work, ever before and currently. So, but one of the things I love about the writing, from the catalog is the description of these works as like a universe in a world, or a universe in a pot. And so to actually think about Takaezu herself, thinking about these objects as both beings, sentient object, but also worlds. And so I hope that people get a chance to really experience, again, this rarity of being like surrounded by these objects.
Sure. If you want to advance one more, I think that we see the scale.
Yeah.
I think the scale we're talking about of these very human forms, and the sensuality of these small ones, and the physicality of the large ones. And one of the things that the kind of my role in the many hats I'm wearing in this show was talking about this really important aspect of Takaezu's work that was a lot of them are rattles. And so one of the incredible things that the Noguchi Museum is doing is the ed team led by Quina and Emma are going to have times during the day that people can come and actually play them themselves and hold them and get to rattle them. And so for people that are not in not in New York, but also as a way of kind of looking through the show, one of the things we wanted to integrate was, these huge ones, even when they're being made, have a really, really incredible resonance. And one of in the installation work that I did in my role as an artist in the show, I recorded one of these large ones kind of gently tapping it, resonating it. And then in these smaller ones you see in the next slide, also spent several years recording a bunch of the small rattles at the foundation in private collections, and in both the museums and in the Noguchi and the Honolulu Museum of Art. And so the history of this was that Takaezu had dropped a piece of clay into one of her pieces. And after she fired it, it rattled because there was this little piece of clay in the work. And she loved this so much that she started to reproduce it on purpose. And so she called this practice sending messages. Sometimes she would wrap them with messages around them with little pieces of paper so they wouldn't stick. And of course, those would burn off. Sometimes she would write a word inside the sculpture. And so when you play them, there's not only a sound that comes out of it, but also this kind of physicality of how you have to play them. And some of the demonstrations we have, you'll see the quite different physicality. And so we wanted to have in the through thread of the show, we wanted to have someone be able to experience that in different ways. And so I created a sound guide for the show, a kind of that we've been hinting at, that you can go through the entire show. Thank you, Christina. You can go through the entire show prioritizing sound. And throughout the show, there are QR codes where you can scan the QR code and see in the Bloomberg app what that piece sounds like and what it looks like to have to play it. And each of them have different physicalities. And the way that I was thinking about this, not just as kind of demonstrations, these closed form etudes that I have that are of the pieces, and not just as musical instruments, because I really don't think of them as musical instruments. I think of them as kind of activating the sculptures, the recordings that ended up in the installation, that there's this different way of experiencing the work. And it changes the way that you look at all of the other works. And as I said in my essay talking about Hawaii, there's so many places in Hawaii where if you're at the base of a mountain range, in most places in the world, you might be in the mountains if you're seeing only mountains. But in Hawaii, if you use your other senses, if you listen, then suddenly you might realize that waves are crashing right behind you and you can smell salt in the air and you're standing on sand, you can feel the sand. And so it's only by using all your senses that you actually can understand the entire landscape of the work. And so in the way that Takaezu used her glazes to create these incredible 360-degree landscapes that maybe one of the other curators can talk about more. She also creates this interiority of landscape that you can only experience through the physicality and sound of playing them to understand the interior hidden landscape. And of course, we have the sound guide that you can go through and these other elements that allow you to hear them. But what I think is fascinating is then it means that you're kind of wondering as you see the rest of the pieces, like, what is this imagined interior landscape? What is the possibility of hearing these different objects and what they could look like? So here, I'll let you listen to me playing this one. Someone mentioned Mesoamerican figures, and we know that Takaezu did spend time at, is it SAR, Kate, in Santa Fe, looking at some of the different sculptures that they had there. And again, kind of looking across different techniques with ceramics and kind of intersectional approaches her work is really fascinating. Here's that devastation forest slide that I mentioned from the previous. Maybe we can move on with some of the other aspects.
Well, maybe, yeah, I mean, would love to maybe give Kate and Glenn a chance to really speak about the closed forms, the large sculptural, I mean, I think of them as sculptural. And I mean, you're really kind of like taking the ceramic media and the painting media to create these, incredible forms. Or do you want to talk about that here with these, with the forest, Glenn and Kate? I'm actually still listening. I can still hear the sound of the ceramic piece in the back of my head, but I'm trying to catch up and look forward at the same time. I mean, I guess I want to say one other thing, just to kind of continue to set the tone here. Leilehua, I loved in your catalog essay how you refer to the experience of synesthesia and how both being in Hawaii, but being this work kind of mixes your senses. I mean, you mentioned this idea of like being in a landscape and then looking at something, but then realizing something else is happening behind you. And I feel like the exhibition does that in such an amazing way. It kind of changes your perception and makes you, especially seeing it at the Noguchi Museum, you're really aware of, trucks passing, but also like, if you're downstairs in the garden, of like bamboo brushing against the fences, and then to go back in the exhibition and have these time-based elements going on at the same time, or accessible through your own through your own phone or something. I mean, really, I just am so enthralled with this, again, interdisciplinary experience of her work that I really hope viewers and listeners get a chance to experience it, not just through our talk. But yeah, wanted to give Glenn and Kate a chance to maybe to speak about some of the installation, why don't you just talk us through whether you want us to go back or forward in terms of the images?
Kate, do you want to talk about these, and then maybe I can say a bit about the closed forms? Oh, I think you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm back. Yeah, absolutely. So this series is called Homage to Devastation Forest, and it's inspired in part by what Leilehua was talking about, but a forest that was burned out by a volcano and was left these kind of burned out husks of trees. And Takaezu saw the forest as this kind of incredible place where kind of death and rebirth were held together. And she actually talked about that in her ceramics, also thinking about after the first firing, that this organic material kind of died in a certain way, but that she brought life back into it through glazing. And I think you can feel that tension in this work, but this is one of her later kind of environmental displays. This isn't one that you can walk in between. She contained it in this way, in this kind of rock garden, but it has this incredible environmental presence that we were so excited to have on view. A lot of these works, and Glenn will talk about the Star series in a moment, are part of an incredible collection at the Racine Art Museum. So we felt very lucky that these more monumental pieces were able to travel. But I will say, just coming back a little bit, and in this room, you'll see also there are some smaller works as well in this installation, that at the same time that Takaezu was going big and making these kind of extraordinary environmental displays, she also continued to make kind of small palm-sized works. And she said of those, sometimes a small one can contain everything, which I think is really beautiful, that she wasn't just like, look at these huge things I can make, which are incredible and immersive and extraordinary in their own right. But that idea of kind of capturing an entire world or conjuring that in some abstract way, she was able to do at such a range of scales and different ways, I guess.
I wonder if we should go forward, just so we see that we do have quite a lot of images and they're great to see. So maybe we could just look at a few of them while I talk about these closed forms, which, as Kate said earlier, really are her signature contribution to the typology of ceramics. So just to say briefly on the technical side, these are thrown. She did make hand-built forms as well. But as you can probably see in this image, they're throwing rings. So you really feel them being lifted from the mass into the volume. And they're remarkable for all sorts of reasons. As Leilehua has been very eloquently describing, they are these kinetic sculptures. There's this invitation for you to travel inside them with your mind and sort of inhabit that dark air within them, that's provided by the rattle, as well as the actual withholding of that interior space. But then, as you can see, I think this is a great image. You see this. They also have this incredible quality of depth in a purely visual or pictorial way. And the fact that they're near spherical or ovoid or cylindrical means that you can rotate them, and they're like paintings that never end. They're kind of boundaryless. And so they have a very different compositional dynamic than the contemporaneous paintings that would have been made by late abstract expressionists or people getting into color field and stain painting, who of course were her exact contemporaries. And she was paying a lot of attention to that type of work, that painted work, as we know from her correspondence and associations from Cranbrook on, and also the fact that she in fact did make paintings herself in the late 60s and early 70s in acrylic. But there's something particular about these closed forms, maybe go on to the next one, where you see this incredible quality of depth. This one we think of as having almost like windows that are made perhaps somewhat adventitiously by the overlap of these different glazes, so that they sort of go in and in and in this infinite way. And it's always important to remember when looking at these that of course she was doing all this blind, because she wouldn't have seen any of these colors until after the object was fired. So it would have just been various tints of beige when she applied them in the first place. And it is hard to understand how she could possibly have foreseen the kinds of pictorial effect that she would be able to achieve. It was obviously the product of long experience. And talking to ceramic artists about her work, one of the things they will routinely say is that in her making her own glazes, because she did compound mix her own glazes and devise them, constantly experimenting, she was equally masterful really as a chemist and as a firing technician as she was as a form giver. And it's really something that leaves ceramic artists slack-jawed what she was able to do, just in terms of expanding her own palette and the palette of the discipline. So, might start from the creation of the silhouette on the wheel, as you can see here, and she was indeed a very, very skilled thrower. Would always make a few T-bowls every morning to warm up, and would sort of judge whether it was a throwing day or not a throwing day, depending on how that went for her. But it was really in the glazing after they were bisque fired. It was in that next round of applying the slips and glazes that she was making them into these visual worlds. So an incredible combination of externalization and internalization in these objects.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I think it's so incredible to hear you describe her technique and then actually see her, with this shape taking shape. And so the catalog has many, many documentary photographs of her in her studio and her at work and process images. So I think we're going to expand out a little bit beyond the work, maybe think about sort of the last quarter century of her life when she, completes her training and teaching in the Midwest and then comes to the East Coast and settles in New Jersey. There was an earlier view of her in her studio. And, she, parallel to having a very robust, art making career, was also an educator at Princeton. And it's great to see some of the lenders that have followed her throughout her trajectory. Chloe, can we go to the next image? Let's see. Yeah, there's another one of these beautiful closed forms at the Tang. Oops. Okay, and are we going to hold the sound work? Or are we going to play it right now? You want to hold it? Okay, because we're going to play it towards the end. But all to say though that again, to sort of celebrate the amazing, art media that's actually in the exhibition, the chance to, see playing with the objects, but also these beautiful video works that Leilehua has made to accompany the exhibition is really, really an exceptional way to experience the show. But I thought we could talk a little bit about Toshiko's, both her non-ceramic work, so her weavings and her paintings, but I also want to open up sort of thinking about her and her community. And, particularly there's a beautiful installation, another fabric and sculpture installation with the artist Lenore Tawney, and really kind of, I think about this curatorial thread, this art historical thread, thinking about Toshiko Takaezu as really like, teaching us about multiple centers, decentering the history of art and moving it throughout the country and throughout the world. But then also, I think of her example as being, again, an exceptional global feminist, and really kind of, bringing in new media into the history of art, bringing in new collaborators, and really, thinking about the community that she was part of. So don't know which one of you want to take on some of those questions.
If we go forward a couple more, we get to some of the weavings. If you mentioned weavings, if you wanted Kate to talk about the weavings a little bit.
Yeah, that would be great. Kate has her essays and the catalog is specifically about the weavings. That's a beautiful one. Yeah.
So yeah, as you said, Takaezu was also an incredibly accomplished weaver and painter. She started weaving really early when she was in Hawaii, experimenting with some techniques that were actually traditional Okinawan weaving of banana fibers. But she studied weaving at University of Hawaii and also at Cranbrook with the Finnish weaver Marianne Strangell, who actually taught her to do these high pile raya rugs. And her training at Cranbrook was very much about creating kind of functional weavings. And what Takaezu would do with that is, follows a similar trajectory to what she was doing with ceramics, of really just kind of pushing the bounds of this medium. She would make these enormous wall hangings, and she'd use them both as wall hangings, but on the rug or on the floor, and as these kind of incredible grounds for her ceramic vessels, so they can be found kind of nestled in between the different fibers of these textiles. I think of them in many ways, and what my essay in the book is about in many ways is her using these textiles to create a sense of place. So you may see, as I was talking about, she would put one of her closed forms in a kind of snowy hillside or nestled in the grass, but she'd also nestle them up in these incredible environments of her textiles. So really experimenting there. And she was friends with some incredible textile artists as well. One of them being Alice Kagawa Parrott, who is also from Hawaii and went with her to Cranbrook and is extraordinary in her own right. But the two of them did some really interesting things in terms of starting to make more pictorial wall hangings. So pushing what kind of fiber art could be. And as you said, Takaezu was also friends with the incredible fiber art pioneer Lenore Tawney. The two of them were dear friends and actually lived together for a time when Tawney's studio was being refurbished. And they loved to install their work together. And Tawney actually talked about how Takaezu was her favorite person to install her work, that she had just this kind of incredible sense of how to do this. And Tawney made what she called woven forms, which is a kind of interesting connection to Takaezu's closed form, using this sort of ambiguous in-between title, but they're incredible sculptural free-hanging textiles. And I'm not sure if we have a photo of it in here, but we decided in the show to replicate or take inspiration from a 1979 exhibition in which Takaezu showed this piece of hers called Gaia, but also made a kind of bed of her moons, a whole environment of them, and paired it with a tawny textile that has this kind of moon-like aperture. There's a really interesting play between the kind of ethereal, light-filled textile that Tawney created and the kind of weighty, grounded, but still cosmic sense of Takaezu's moons. I think they're in a really interesting dialogue with one another. And for us, it felt really we talked about it a lot of what it meant to put other artists' work in a Takaezu retrospective. But I think it goes in part to what you're talking about of her kind of incredibly expansive network and generosity was so central to who she was and as an artist. And so it felt like kind of following her lead in some sense and honoring this really important part of her practice to replicate this joint exhibition of the two of them. And I should say also, Glenn worked on a retrospective of Tani's work and has done incredible research into her life and her legacy. So I don't know, Glenn, if you want to jump in there.
No, that was great, Kate. Just a quick shout out to another amazing show that's on in New York now, which is about weaving and abstraction. That includes Tani's work and other great artists, including Annie Albers and Sheila Hicks, Olga the Amaral, in relation to ancient Peruvian weavings. And boy, you couldn't have a better day than to see that in the morning and then go to the Noguchi in the afternoon. And the Met just acquired some of Tani's most important woven forms. So definitely have a look at that show if you have a chance.
Thank you so much. I know we're running a little close on time, but I want to give a chance for the curators to speak about Toshiko's actually interest in the universe and like the star series and the moons and these celestial formations, which I think also then brings us back to Leilehua's incredible sound works as well. So maybe as a way to kind of like open it up and reach some sort of concluding thoughts, we could go back maybe a little, I don't know, backwards or forwards to some of the these kind of universal celestial works. Okay, I'm losing track where we are in the images, but let's see what we've
I'd like
got.
to say quickly that there is, we can't show it here, but there's a video in the exhibition of a work that she did actually just after the moon landing, the Apollo mission, which is called Yume, which means cloud in Japanese. And it's an incredibly interesting short film. So she did that as well, kind of artist moving image, where you see the camera pan over the surface of this closed form. And it's very much as if it's coming in like a lunar lander onto the surface of this ceramic object. It's absolutely fantastic. And we know that she was very captivated by the moon. Great stories about, her driving home in the dark without her car lights on so that she could appreciate the full moon, getting pulled over by the police and sort of haranguing them that they should be looking at the moon instead of bothering her. But there's a real sense in which she felt herself to be in this combination of orbits and was putting objects into that gravitational celestial motion. And Leilehua, perhaps you would want to say a little bit more about that, because there's of course this idea of like the containment of those energies as well as the participation in them.
And Chloe, go back maybe one image and is it one or two? Wait, I thought after the weaving detail, or maybe a little bit further back. Yeah, okay, that's a nice.
Takaezu often referred to these as mahina, which is the Hawaiian word for moon. So what I find really fascinating about this is just the kind of all of these different moon cycles that are associated with really specific colors when you get into kind of Hoaka and Lono, and some of these ones that are just before sunrise or just before suns or just after sunset, where you can kind of only see the moon as a crescent in this super vibrant sky. And so what I love about the moons is that they're not just these kind of white orbs that she did. And there's this one of the really gorgeous installations that the team put together shows a bunch of different colors of moons. I think we have some of that on slide 36. Of some of these really incredible, gorgeous, it's I think one before this. Oh no, never mind, I'm on the wrong set. There we go. That's just really evoking all of these different colors that happen with that. And Christina, did you also want me to talk a little bit about how that connects to the other work? Is that the other half of your question?
Sure. Yeah, quickly, and then we can then we can begin to close.
Sure. And so some of that was just very briefly, if you can find the installation views of the installation stills that are in the 28, 29, 30, I think, was kind of bringing that back with some of that color. So this is obviously kind of Starscape, and it kind of goes in this big cycle, but those were great. The Mauna Kea one that you were on was perfect. Yes. Kind of looking at what I think, and Glenn and I were talking about this, just the fact that getting these colorscapes in her works is so difficult. And she was making her own glazes, and she was creating these things with just applying them as all kind of beige looking and then waiting for them to be fired. And what I find really fascinating is kind of seeing these different colorscapes in Hawaii that she was obviously, for me, so obviously inspired by. It makes it kind of even more dramatically incredible that she was able to get these exact colors and these exact kind of color combinations in some of her works. And so part of, as a kind of didactic aspect of the work, I was interested in showing some of these colorscapes that she grew up around as a way of kind of engaging with that in the work. But then on its own, kind of pairing these large scale images of Hawaii without any man-made things with the sounds of Takaezu, so it feels as though you're kind of inside one of her works. And also kind of as an extension on the artistic side of that, looking at what it means to kind of sit with respect to these different places, and what that means for stewarding these different places, these different historic mountains on Hawaii Island where Takaezu grew up.
Thank you so much, Leilehua. I can't believe that it was almost 2 o'clock. It is 2 o'clock already, and we're going to start wrapping up with a very special Brooklyn Rail choreography to New Social Environment. I think I'm going to hand it back to Chloe, or maybe we're going to open up some questions from the audience, and then we have some other very special interventions coming up.
Well, firstly, I just want to say thank you so much for that dialogue. That was such a pleasure to listen to. And it's just such a beautiful exhibition. So it was lovely to hear more about it from all of you. I have several questions from the audience, if you will have them. So the first one is going to be from Nina. Nina, I will give you the chance to unmute to ask your question.
Hi, good morning. I'm from Maui. It's so nice to be getting to see this beautiful conversation and to see Christina, Kate, and Leilehua all in dialogue, people I know from different times in life. I love, Leilehua, what you were saying about the interior landscape. And Glenn, I also loved what you were talking about in terms of, this idea of the sort of boundless landscape sort of created by the kind of 360-degree engagement with the works. And that made me think about ideas of like privacy and intimacy and access. And I was curious about how she herself thought about sort of the access to her works, who might have had access to that sort of full immersive sensorial experience, and particularly by way of her own curatorial practice, if she was inviting engagement with objects in that way when she was curating or not. And I just want to thank you all so much for this beautiful conversation and curatorial project.
Maybe I'll speak to some of the kind of insider access, and then Glenn, you can talk about the curatorial side. One of the fun things about going back to those different spaces, especially the foundation with some of her former students, was that they knew the pieces that sounded cool. So when I went as somebody who they knew was going to be activating them with sound, it was like they were finding old friends, and they would go, "Oh, this one sound. This is my favorite one. Listen, it's got 2 different pitches," and they knew them so well. And so it's really obvious to me that at least with her students, that was such an active, playful part of engaging with the different works. The physicality and the ability to do that, and she herself talks a lot about that sound was really, really important to her, and has a couple different quotes saying that this kind of space within was the most important thing. And I think the quote that I love that I included in a couple different things is that she talked about, you know, like this, you see things obviously, but then like a little kid, if you see it, you want to touch it. And then of course there's sound, and there's these three aspects to engaging with a ceramic work. And they're not necessarily in that order, but that they're all connected. And that was really important to her. And so I don't get in trouble with the Noguchi team. No, you are not allowed to touch the pieces except on the educational specific times. But that is a really special part of the Noguchi show, that you can actually walk in between the star series, which I don't know that any of the other museums will actually let anyone do, and that you can schedule time to touch them. And so maybe I'll pass it then to Glenn to talk more about her kind of what you were thinking about with the curatorial aspect of inviting people into these different multi-sensory worlds with the different pieces.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I'd love to hear what you would say about this, Kate, too, but I'll just say very briefly, I think there were lots of different levels of access that Takaezu granted to people, of which perhaps the most intimate was actually bringing in apprentices, we might call them, often former students of hers, and sharing her life with them and making her work with them. And particularly those late large scale works were only possible for her to make with that kind of assistance, you know, really throwing together, facing on two sides of the object as it was forming. So very, very intimate. And I think there's something about her work that invites that kind of exploration. Again, perhaps landscape-like in that regard. It's something that you go in search of and never feel like you've fully experienced, but you can kind of continue to find more in it. But I don't know, Kate, what do you think about that from our, you know, thinking about our installation, which you were so crucial in orchestrating?
Yeah, I think it's definitely kind of woven throughout. And Nina, it's very nice to say hi virtually over Zoom after so long. But I guess one thing that I thought a lot about was exactly what you're talking about, this idea of a kind of intimate immensity, that, to borrow Bachelard, but like both those things are kind of contained within the bounds of kind of singular works, but also these immersive installations that you're always kind of bouncing between this feeling of the intimate and the immense. And I think that's kind of the power of her work in such a phenomenal way. And I think replicating her installations or taking inspiration from that was in part thinking about how she was able to achieve that sense where you kind of zone into a single work and feel kind of contained within it, but also part of this larger environment. In terms of layers of access, I don't think there were any installations where she'd actually let folks touch her pieces, but I could be wrong about that. But one thing, just a kind of anecdote to share too about her studio, is that she had this really long dining table and she loved to host meals, and she was an incredible cook and had an incredible gardening practice. But beneath her table, she'd keep large moons, her ceramic moons, and the studio still has them there. And as you're kind of sharing a meal around the table, you can kind of put your feet on the moons and explore them with your feet, which is this incredible, intimate experience. Something we thought about doing at the museum, but didn't feel quite right. But I think giving folks these kind of educator-led daily experiences where they can hold onto a piece and explore it through touch and sound, we hope is kind of honoring that intimate connection you can have with a work through touch.
Amelia from the Noguchi team kindly put in the chat that it's daily at 3 p.m. and you can sign up at the front desk. So thank you, Amelia.
Thanks, Amelia. That's
amazing. So great that you can touch them every day like that. That's really special.
So they are a big, huge thanks to our educators and gallery attendants, because having access to the works in this way is challenging for anyone that works in a museum, you know. And so a lot of creative thinking and care went into that kind of operation. So just to call that out. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that question, Nina. The next question is going to be from Geraldine. Geraldine, I'll give you the chance to unmute if you'd like.
Aloha, everyone. I am from Oahu, Hawaii, and I am originally a New Yorker. So I'm excited to be back in New York City next month to be able to see these pieces in person. I do have a question. There were a lot of obvious in terms of her artwork, the textiles, the painting, the sculptures, but I saw the glimpses of those bells. I now live at a Buddhist monastery, and those bells are very um, similar to the bells that we have here. So, what is the story behind those bells?
Maybe I could take that one. First of all, that does raise the interesting question of her relationship to Buddhism, which must have been in her mind when she made those bells fairly late in her career. It was very common in her own lifetime for people to sort of throw the word Zen at her and hope it would stick. Takaezu herself was actually not very interested in Zen, although Lenore Tawney was and was a very serious practitioner, but Takaezu was not. And she did have one experience of a Zen temple in Japan during her important trip there in the mid 1950s, which left her singularly unimpressed. And apparently, she later said to her sister that if they knew a real Zen master, then it was their own mother, who was so committed to raising the family and having a hard work ethic. And that was what she really respected. So it doesn't seem like the bells were necessarily intended as having a kind of specific ritual connection to Buddhism, certainly, but they must surely reflect, again, that cultural inheritance that we were speaking about at the beginning. From an artistic point of view, they're just very interesting, as I remarked very briefly before, as a translation of her ceramic practice into this more obdurate material. And of course, a very common way to create bronze is to first fashion a model in clay, then take a mold from that, create a wax, and then use lost wax casting to create the bronze. And that is exactly how she did it. And then she would use the molten wax to embellish the surface. So she was basically using the same moves that she would on her closed forms on the bells. And in fact, the bell that's at the Noguchi Museum actually has a drip on the top of it because it was inverted when the wax was applied, and so it has this kind of amazing moment of elevation happening right at its apex, which is very beautiful. So a great example of her lateral thinking and the way that she was able to move from one medium to another while retaining her artistic identity.
Thank you so much for that question. Really great question. And thank you for that answer, Glenn. The next question I'll read on behalf of Michelle. Michelle is curious about Toshiko's approach to lighting. This would play on her interests on the moon, waning and filling.
That's a really interesting question. I would say a lot of photographs that we looked at of Takaezu's works, there are just incredible shadows that are cast by her pieces, and it's something we played a lot with in our exhibition. I think also we were talking about more abstractly how the piece, like that blue form, kind of feels like it contains light within it, that they have this kind of feeling like they're shining out, reaching out. And some pieces actually are, there's one work in the show actually called Light that has a kind of blue horizon on it, but glows in this incredible way. There's also, and sorry, it's kind of like free associating through light associations, but there's another painting in the show called Akari, which means light in Japanese, and is of course the title that Noguchi gave to his light sculptures, his paper lanterns. So I think this kind of internal sense of light was very crucial to the pieces as a kind of balance to what she called this dark space contained within. So I think definitely there's a play there. In terms of how she lit her shows, though, if that is what the question is, I'm not totally sure, aside from this play of shadows that she definitely had going throughout all of them.
We also know that she did sometimes wet the surfaces of her ceramics to draw out not necessarily a better, but a different range of colors. So that's another, example of her thinking actively about the relational quality of the objects in their environment.
And
Thank
I
you.
should, so sorry, Akari means light in terms of like illumination and also weightlessness, which is another interesting kind of connection. Yeah.
You do have one over your left shoulder, Kate. So
I do. Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much for those answers. And that was a wonderful question, Michelle. I'm going to ask the last question today. I know you spoke a little bit about color and color mixing. I'm so fascinated by that because, you know, color mixing becomes yet another way to relate back to the land and to think about the earth and where colors come from. And I'm just curious if there's any background that you've learned about why she chose specific colors or why certain colors recur in the work, because they're so vibrant and beautiful, and you can see them get mastered over time. And so I'm just really, really curious about that story and her relationship with color.
We know that in her connection with Jay Jensen, who was the curator at the Contemporary Museum in Honolulu, where I grew up, that she and he kind of had a lot of dialogue about some of these colors, and with him kind of coined some of these specific terms like makaha blue. Makaha is an area, but kind of that like deep ocean blue that you see in a lot of her pieces. That's really different in person, even though these photographs are fantastic. And then ocean edge, which is this kind of light teal that you see in a bunch of her pieces in the Noguchi Museum. They're in the far gallery by the elevator. And so those I think are really clearly connected to me to very specific ocean colors. The red dirt color on the cover of the monograph is very obviously that like red dirt from Hawaii color. But we know that she experimented a lot with different things in her glazes, including kind of using different materials that were naturally sourced, which she later stopped doing. And even perhaps a radioactive one. We were in the, but that's kind of a broad. I know that with Kate we talked about kind of none of these are direct landscapes, but to me the kind of it's so clear that these colors are really specifically drawn, or some of the colors are really, really specifically drawn from Hawaii, that she kind of comes back to, and in the way that she uses them and the combinations of them.
Thank you so, so much. Thank you for this conversation, and thank you so, so much to everyone for your questions. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Kate and Glenn for a reading to close us out.
Thank you all so much. This has been such a pleasure. So I wanted to share a poem that Takaezu wrote actually and inscribed on a vessel that's in the show. This is one of the earliest pieces in the exhibition. It's from 1949 when she was a student in Hawaii. And it's actually one of the last pieces we located and added to the exhibition. So we're very happy to have found it. And Glenn will speak a little bit more about a potter who may have inspired this practice of inscribing her work with poetry, and of course carries on to what Leilehua was talking about in terms of sending messages later on. But here's the poem. Dancing twilight of shadow, mystic sense, cannot express in words, empty feeling one has. Thanks.
Such an amazing poem, because you think about those words: dancing, shadow, express, empty, and they all relate to her later work, that she did it so early. So it's quite extraordinary, that very compressed piece of language. And so here's another one. This is from Otagaki Rengetsu, who was a 19th century Buddhist nun in Japan, a very remarkable woman in her own right, who is known not just for her poetry, but also for inscribing her own ceramics with poetic verses on the outside so that you could see them, not on the inside, as Leilehua was talking about. So this is a poem of Rengetsu which Takaezu might well have known. And it goes like this. Like this cape, the moon rises out over the sea, its light as full as the tide.
So beautiful. Thank you both so, so much. And I'm going to share one last closed form etude that we can watch together before we close out. So here we go. Thank you. Thank you so, so much, Kate. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Leilehua. Thank you, Christina. Thank you to all of you for being here today. Thank you to Amelia at the Noguchi Museum, who was so, so helpful in pulling together all those beautiful images that you saw today. Thank you to the Terra Foundation for American Art, who sponsor our NSE program and make daily weekday conversations like this one possible. They also support our archive, where you can view this video very shortly this afternoon. We'd also like to say that the Rail has been free and independent for 23 years. A donation directly supports our writers, our production staff, and our operations. You can support our work through the link in the chat. And if you're free tomorrow at a special time of 2 p.m., join us for a conversation with Olivia Kahn-Sperling and our production assistant, Joel Danilowitz, on the occasion of Kahn-Sperling's new book, Island Time. And as is Rail tradition, you can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so, so much for being here today. And I hope you get a chance to see the show if you pass through New York or are based here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Wonderful.
you.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Ahui
Thank
ho.
you.
Thank you, Christina.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Fong. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so
Lily.
much.
Thank you so much.
Bye.